Welcome back to Honoring the Journey, a really special adventure today with my new friend, Kevin Sweeney. I don't know if you know about this guy. He used to be a pastor for a while. He's a hospice chaplain. He is a writer. He's written books like The Making of a Mystic and The Joy of Letting Go. And he's got a brand new book coming out that I cannot wait to talk about in a couple minutes. He's somebody with a great story who loves to hear a story from other people and help them through their journeys. So I'm very excited to welcome you, Kevin, to Honoring the Journey. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm feeling the energy already. You told me
Yeah?
off Christian radio host before. I'm feeling the real intentional, lot of experience. Let's set the mood. Let's get the energy high. I feel that
Let's
already.
do it.
It's
Yes.
8 p.m. for me right now, so this is my first thing of the day. So the energy's up. It's
Oh,
good.
you're high up there. I love it. That's fantastic.
So
Well,
that's like all day, and then slowly it'll just dip. That's
yeah. So,
uh,
he lives in Hawaii, guys, and I'm a little jealous because when I first got on, I got a little more of the view of where he's at, and I was like, my husband has moved me. I'm landlocked in Utah with mountains, which are beautiful. I'm not complaining, but yeah, I definitely would love to live at the ocean. So good for you living in Hawaii.
yeah. Came out here for college, and then got married out here. My wife and I lived in Orange County, California for about 5 years, like school, grad school type of stuff in our 20s. But just as time went on more and more, we were like, this is where we want to be. This is where we want to settle roots. This is where eventually we want to raise kids. So yeah, it's different. I would say day to day is different than what most people would ever imagine, but still, for me, it's the best place in the world. So yeah, we're happy to be here.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, okay, Kevin, let's get to know you a little bit. I want to talk about little
Yeah.
Kevin growing up. Did you grow up in the church or is this something you kind of walked into?
Did you say little Kevin? Is that
Yeah,
what you
I
said?
did. I said little Kevin. Little Kevin. Let's talk about little Kevin growing up. When did you start going to church? Was this a family thing? Was it something you found on your own?
Yeah, tell people because my first book, The Making of a Mystic, has more parts. It's not a whole thing, but it has parts of my story that are just so connected with the making of a mystic and why I even use that. But I grew up with a very pleasant indifference to religion, which
Okay.
I'm very grateful for. And I'm like,
Is that something your parents instilled in you then?
you know what it was? I went to Catholic school first, second, third grade. I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to Catholic school. To this day, I still don't know why in fourth grade, I was the youngest of three boys. I went to a public school. But at that point, going to a public school in Los Angeles for me was like my earliest experience of salvation.
Wow.
Like, ki-
Okay.
kids are fighting and cussing like wild, and this is where I've always meant to be. And the other parts of me that have been stifled by this Catholic school are ready to come out. This is where I
Oh
belong.
boy.
And soon after that, my dad comes from a very traditionally Irish Catholic family. My mom had more some evangelical experiences growing up that I was unaware of. I didn't know about that when I was young, but I found out later she did. And she came into the Catholic Church for my dad and his family. And, we went to mass when I was little, but around that time or whenever it was, like me and my brothers just wanted to stop going. And it wasn't ideological, it wasn't philosophical or theological. It was like this stuff, this you're a kid, like this is boring.
Yeah.
And like, was it like the Pope ex cathedra? Like, how dare they? I can't go. It was nothing like that.
Yeah.
And really grateful that our parents just let us do that.
Wow. Yeah.
You know how many different directions that can go in, but there was no shaming, no coercing,
No
no,
fear.
no, at all. And there wasn't a lot of God. There wasn't really any God talk in our house. We weren't a family who's like, "What's the Lord doing in your life?" I had never heard those conversations. So once that happened, it was like I had this background of like Catholic Church and Jesus on a cross. I didn't fully get it, but I also didn't have a negative experience, which is a big deal, as we all know, for people who are spending the rest of their lives. Family systems, emotional health, church life, that all gets woven into a very complex knot for a lot of people that they spend their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s unraveling if they need
Yes.
to.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I just, like I said, a pleasant indifference. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good. I didn't see it. I wasn't thinking about it as a source of good, and I wasn't thinking about it as a source of bad. I wasn't thinking about it after that. So
Mm.
that was the religious background that led to my sort of coming of age adolescent years.
Oh, wow. And then, well, I have a confession to make. It's so funny that you brought up, what is the Lord doing in your life? Because my daughter just said to me the other day, she goes, Mom, we always talk about how we never wanted to be alone with you because you would say, tell me how you're doing spiritually. And we'd all
Mm,
tense up, like, because there's a right or wrong answer to that when you're in
mm,
evangelicalism and you're afraid your kid is going to be a heretic. So, yeah, I guess I put a lot of pressure on my kids growing up, but totally different story now. But this is about you. But I want you to know there really are families
yeah,
that do that.
yeah,
And the
and
motivation is fear. It's fear.
yeah. And I think for particular culture as a whole, like you're referring to, obviously there's so much of that. There's so much emotional damage that happens to kids through the language of religion, which it's just a lot of people's own personal issues of control and things working themselves out through a religious situation. So I get that. I also think there's healthy ways to do that, to like encourage we're a part of a story and also with that too. But for me, there wasn't really any of that after that. So
Yeah,
and I'm grateful for that looking back, to be honest.
I
So
would
yeah,
be
that
too.
was the background. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend she grew up, her mom was kind of a hippie and like
Mm.
in Utah with, a very strong Mormon presence. And she just never had religion. And I just look at her like, how in the, what is, like, how do you do that? And some of the
Yeah.
things she hears from me make her shudder, and some of them make her cry. She's like, I can't,
Mm.
you had to deal with that, and it's like, I don't even know what it's like to not. So I don't know
Mm.
any different,
Yeah.
But what a
Yeah.
gift your parents gave you though, to not put that kind of pressure, to let
Yeah.
you find your
No.
way. I mean, that takes a lot of faith you know, in the process, which is hard to
Mm.
find.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
but then you wound up as a pastor. How did that happen? I'm a little
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah, no, no. So that's sort of like the atmospheric background, right, in my life as a kid of what I
Right.
just described, and specifically when it comes to spirituality, faith, and religion. And then the very quick version of the story from, 11, 12 up until 18, when I had this profound, spontaneous, and awakening moment with God, was I had a very, to me, classic experience, that a lot of evangelical preachers like love to eat up, where I had everything in the sense of like what people who were into what I was into wanted, and yet it felt like nothing. And what that meant was for me, it was like basketball. I trained my whole life not my whole life, but like I trained very seriously in basketball to play in college. I was involved in music at a young age. I have been getting high and drinking since I was like preteen, like I was a little kid, so that was very common for me already. And I was selling weed in high school, getting money. So I'm like, dude, I'm 16, 17, like living the life everybody wants already. Like I'm an adult almost, in my head, like money and freedom and sports and attention. And, Thomas Keating, the great centering prayer teacher, says, your ego, he calls them programs for happiness, ways in which our unique egos are structured to find a sense of safety or love or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And some people are like power and control people. That's their way. Some people are affection and esteem people, and other people are like security, like feeling safe people. I'm in an affection and esteem all the way. It means give me the attention.
Mm.
My ego says, I want to feel special. I want to feel better than people. I want whatever celebrities have, I want that, right? I wasn't a power and control person at all. I was an attention person. And by the time I'm 16 or 17, I'm like, I have that. Like I'm scoring almost 30 points a game in basketball. I'm doing all these other things. But what I couldn't escape what began my spiritual journey was a radical journey of self-awareness. That's where things started for me, which was aided by like I started eating mushrooms when I was like 16, and that was a big part of my life. I have a chapter in my first book called Mushrooms as Missionaries,
Oh,
and
wow.
I essentially make the point of like the healthiest version of a missionary, right? If you take the colonialism, the expansion, the violence, the white Christian nationalism out of what often has been, couched within being missionaries, but let's give people the benefit of the doubt. And the healthiest version is someone who is pointing others towards the fullness of life in Christ.
Mhm.
That's a good thing.
Mhm.
If I'm a 14-year-old boy, I want a guide. I want somebody to help me. I just didn't feel like I had that in that way. And so I'm like, if that's the role of a missionary, then mushrooms were that role in my life, pointing me beyond themselves towards that which I did not know was true, but was starting to sense might be true about something
Wow.
out there.
There's
And
so much fear
mm,
about using mushrooms. I know for me specifically being in evangelicalism, I mean, it was a no-no to do anything.
mm,
Once you check out of your brain and that means a demon checks in, it was just so bad.
yeah.
I believed all of it. But I've had several guests. I haven't done mushrooms yet, but I've had several guests who have, and I'm telling you, not one person has had a bad
Mm,
trip, which my husband, he saw somebody on mushrooms in college and he was like, never do it. This person was losing their mind. I'm like, clearly they did something else with it or did way too much.
mm,
Because the people I talked to are like, no, it was like revealing to me. Like, why is that? Does it take your ego out and let you
mm.
see your true self? Is that what this is?
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's the mushrooms play one of the biggest roles in my life, because I have these journeys of them pointing beyond themselves. And that's what I sensed when I was young. And I had this starting now I'm starting to have this radical third person awareness, looking back at myself, asking myself, why am I doing like for basketball? Why am I so driven to do this? Like, do I love basketball or does my ego just need what basketball does for me socially? I'm asking that at 17. Do I love this? Or do I, because I would tell people if I finished a game when I was young, I'd say I had a bunch of points, right? And people are coming up like, Mev, like, you got this, bro. Like, you're doing this. And people are giving me that praise. And in those moments, like for public speakers, I think about like Christians, people are like giving you that praise and you kind of like unintentionally linger in other places so you can get more of it from people. Like I was totally doing that as a teenager because what they were saying was good job. You have a
Yeah.
good future in this. What I heard was you matter
Mhm.
and you have a place in this world. And I needed that from them at that point. And I recognized, I'm like, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
If I need other people to tell me who I am, I live and die with every single interaction. That's not freedom. I was thinking this at 17 and it scared, it
Dang.
scared me,
That's
And so
deep. That's so deep.
it was like when I chapter the mushrooms as missionaries, that big part of my journey, which began spirituality at that point, in a conscious journey of it, was all I had to trust was what I saw. I didn't have a youth pastor. I didn't have people like that. Wasn't having these conversations. I was just like, I know what I'm seeing. And it
Wow.
makes too much sense for it to not be real. So my journey began when everybody's talking about embodiment now and trusting you're like, my journey began with my own seeing and with my own inner compass with no guides. And so eventually, it culminates into this. I'm 18. I have I ate mushrooms like 10 times at that point in my life. And we weren't microdosing. This was way before the culture of microdosing began. We were way beyond that.
Yeah, you were probably like the people my husband saw, huh?
Probably. um, but I had this experience where while I was on mushrooms at 18, I had this truly profound, spontaneous awakening, direct experience with God. I laid in like my friend was with me. I was at my girlfriend's house, who's now my wife. So it's funny for us to have that history back then. And, eventually got to a point where like my girlfriend at the time, my wife now fell asleep and my friend's in the other bed just chilling. And I laid on this bed and for like probably about 2 hours, I could almost physically feel like light and love being like infused into my body and enveloping me. And it was like I laid there and I got up and I was like, I am this. I know what just happened. I just experienced God. I know it.
Really? You
And I
just knew.
remember, which was brand new. Like
Yeah.
there was no, I had never, and that always affected how I thought theologically because had never heard a sermon at that point in my life. No one told me anything about the atonement, the bridge that's getting me to God. No, it was just this direct experience before beliefs and beyond beliefs. My faith began with direct embodied experience, which always shaped me. My body was the ultimate source for inspiration, not the Bible. That's where it began. And I believe that's true for everybody, actually, because your incarnational experience is your only experience. It just is.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
No.
and I remember at like 4 a.m., me and my friend are stuck in my girlfriend's house. We're in Los Angeles and we had no way to get home. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna call my parents up. It's 4 a.m. But my parents were cool because they were like, if you ever get stuck, I don't care what situation you're in, call us. And I trusted that. They were cool like that. And so I remember my parents picked me up, me and my friend, we're driving home. And I remember thinking to myself, and this really marks a difference between changing what you believe and changing the very nature of consciousness itself, which is not the same thing. It's like changing your beliefs and changing the believer is totally different. But I remember driving home that day and thinking to myself, and I'm still in high school, I was like, it's not that everything I believe is different. It's that the very I that is doing the believing has been changed.
Wow. Because once you see it, it like
And
did everything just make sense all of a sudden? Is that how it felt?
I think I knew what happened. I was like, everything I have been wondering, waiting for, hoping existed, wondering if it did, that I sensed the mushrooms were pointing me beyond themselves towards whatever that was. I just had a direct encounter with. This is the only thing real I've ever known. Like the love of my girlfriend, I believe, opened me up to the possibility of the love of God. But I'm like, God, love, whatever this was, this was the only thing real I've ever experienced. And from that moment, I was like, I'm done with basketball. I'm not playing in college because I don't love it. I'm not doing music. It's the same thing for my ego. And eventually, soon after I moved away to Hawaii, I was like, I'm starting over. Nobody knows me besides my girlfriend. Like, I'm not cool. I get no attention. And I need to go to a place where my life can truly begin just with God.
Wow. So
And so
you kind of wanted to take yourself off that throne. You wanted to say, I
absolutely.
am not God. I want to spend my life getting to know the real God because that experience was more real than anything I've ever been able to
Exactly.
experience. Okay, that
And I already had enough at
that's really
that point.
cool.
There's questions I ask people, especially pastorally for years, like how many times do you have to taste something to know it isn't good?
Mm,
How many times do you have to experience something to know it isn't real? So even my transformational journey was nobody shaming me because of bad behavior or guilt. I was
mhm,
never guilty. I probably should have been, but I never felt guilt or shame for doing what I was doing growing up. I didn't care. I was like, we all can do whatever we want. I never felt that. So my journey wasn't, how do I be good or right? Mine was like, what does it mean to be free? I'm not free.
mm, yeah,
I can't go to sleep at night sober ever. And it's been like that for a long time. That's an issue. And I
yeah,
know that. I just don't
that's
know
not
how to get
freedom.
out of it.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And so my
Hmm.
journey was always a desire for freedom, not a fear or a need to be right or be good. That wasn't an issue for me. I didn't think about that. And so when I tasted that, I said, there is something that can set me free, or at least I hope there is. And I have to give my life to find it. And when I had that experience, I was like, this is it. And now I'm giving my life to this. I'll walk away from everything else. So that's the
Wow.
background after the religious indifference was leading up to that profound awakening moment.
And then it wasn't even religion that you were really drawn to as much as it was God, the divine.
Mm,
That
mm,
it sounds to me like we get those two things confused. We think that
mm,
faith and religion are the same thing, and they're not.
mm.
And I love. I mean, it just sounds. Oh, it's so hard for me to wrap my brain around, Kevin, because I am such like a product of
Yeah, we have
indoctrination
like
and
reversed experience.
so much.
Yeah.
But I love this, and I wish more people would just listen
Mm,
because, like, when you're telling me this story, even though it's not my experience. It's yours, and it changed you. And one thing I'm realizing, I just spoke with a girl, Mary Terhune, I think, her episode is out right now.
mm,
She, her experience was so different than mine, the
mm,
spiritual awakening. We've all had these spiritual awakenings,
mm,
and we've ended up in the same place, but we got there
mhm.
so differently. And,
Yeah.
in evangelicalism, it's like a formula. You got to do this and say this prayer, and then you're good. And then you got to make sure you go to church and make sure, it's like a to-do list of,
Mm,
transactional things that you do to get the approval and salvation of God.
mm, mm,
Whereas now, like the spiritual awakening, however you get there, it's about love. It's about
mm,
experiencing that unconditional. Um, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to perform.
mm,
And it sounds like you
mm.
experienced that in a completely different, very unbiblical way. my friend.
Mhm.
That's
You know,
interesting.
you, you know what? Looking back, what I find to be like fascinating in the aftermath of that was, like in the 60s when Eastern philosophy and Buddhism was being introduced to a lot of like hippies and counterculture folks through like Alan Watts and eventually Ram Dass and people in that who are writing like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, Alan Watts, when talking about psychedelics, has a famous quote where he says, "When you get the message, hang up the phone." When it
Hmm.
comes to psychedelic, you know, when you get the message, when that which is true, this encounter, whatever it is that happens, when you get it, hang up the phone. It means he says psychedelics were like an instrument, like a microscope or an instrument, and essentially they serve a purpose. But once you have that, the issue isn't to keep taking the call. You've already seen what's true. The issue is to become that which you see, to become
Ooh,
this, to keep going. When honestly, as a person that grew up doing drugs, I'm like, no matter how much spiritual language, that's why I'm slightly ambivalent towards the psychedelic revolution again. Like I'm not hot or cold on it. I'm just ambivalent because I'm like, hey, I know what this did for me, and I can never deny that, and I don't try to
right.
suppress that or deny that at all. But also deep down, I'm like, me growing up as a person who did drugs, I'm like, most people just want to do drugs. Like that's just always that part of me. Like most people just want to get high. And I understand that impulse to do that. But for me, it was bigger than that. And because once I had that experience, I never did mushrooms again, ever.
Really?
And I didn't know that quote, but for me, I was like, let's say 3 months goes by after that, right? Like we have peak experiences, whether it's a psychedelic trip, you go to a worship conference, you go to a youth group thing,
Oh, yeah.
you have a peak experience and you're high for like a week. I'm going to be different forever. A month goes by, Friday comes back around, I'm angry again, I'm pissed, I'm insecure. You're like, all right, I'm back to the same old, it's
The
frustrating.
mountaintop experience.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
for me, like, this is how people get addicted to religious
Mm.
events or like going to Burning Man, going to this, like these religious events, they all can function very similar for the ego who's just trying to escape and find a high. You can see something real up there without a doubt. That kid in a worship conference, he touched something. She
Yeah.
touched something real. And I believe that,
Yeah.
or a
100%.
kid in my situation who does something different. Now, 3 months goes by and I had a moment where I'm like, I want to do mushrooms again because I like them. I just love drugs at that point in my life. But I said, for me to go back to mushrooms would be to betray that which I experienced while I was on them.
Mhm.
For me to go back, and again, it wasn't like a guilty thing. It was just like, no, Kevin, those things were pointing you beyond themselves towards something real, and you experienced that and you touched that. The real journey now is not going back and trying. No, you know what's real. The issue is leaning into that and becoming that, staying connected with that for the rest of your
Mhm.
life. So to me, it was like the mushrooms were the directions to the ocean. Once you're in the ocean, I don't need the directions anymore. I'm already
Yeah.
there. My
You're
issue
there.
is trusting the ocean, being in the ocean, becoming the ocean. And
Huh.
so from that moment on, I never did it again. I never did hard drugs again. It took me a couple of years to quit smoking weed. But I was just like, no, they were pointing me when you get the message, hang up the phone. Kevin, you got the message. You know it's real. Let's keep going. Let's not go
Yeah.
backward.
And that's how
Yeah.
you wound up being a
Well, yeah.
pastor? Did you
Yeah. I
start a
went to
church or did you
Well,
start leading one
after
that was
that, went to Hawaii for college. My girlfriend was out there, is now my wife, and was just really starting over. I learned learning to surf out there because everything I ever did growing up, I quit, and I was like, I have all this energy, so we both were learning to surf together at the time. And within a couple years, I was like, I think God's calling me to be a pastor. And I've never heard anybody say that because I don't really know much Christians. I was just starting to meet some at like college groups or whatever.
Yeah.
And then
It's a very Christian-y thing to say, Kevin.
absolutely. I was there already, dude. I didn't have the atonement.
You didn't even
I
need
had to
anybody to
know
tell
it.
you. You're like, "I know this language."
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
there was a youth pastor who I had met at the time out here. I was like, well, what does it mean? Well, I guess I'm supposed to serve because I was in a very like, the first churches I went to was like Hawaii's version of like the 1980s, 90s, like mega churches. And so I was in a very low church, charismatic type of place. And I loved it. It was awesome at that time. I'd never really been at church like that. And then this guy was like, hey, I went to a Bible college. It's called Life Pacific College. It's in California. It's Foursquare's flagship school. Yeah. Like, it's like, for Pentecostal denomination. I'm like, cool. I think this is where God's calling me. Ended up at a Bible college there. Was really a great experience. It didn't take me long to be like, my life, and I think the Spirit is calling me much wider than the version of faith you're offering me, but I still had a great experience.
Yeah.
I just knew I was going in different places than them. Then I went to Fuller Theological Seminary, and I studied like Black and womanist theology when I was there. So this is 2009 to 2012. And, liberation theology, that just blew my mind. I'm very connected with the book, the Black prophetic tradition, where I really started to inhabit it, not inhabit, but inherit that tradition from some teachers there. And then thought I was going to do a PhD. It fell apart. And then this opening up came, where this idea of planting a church from a friend came along that I embraced, and then moved back here in 2013 and started and led a church in this neighborhood for about 10 years, my wife and I, before we closed it down. So,
Wow. Tell
yeah,
me about that
yeah.
church. What was were you connected to any denomination, or was it
No,
just,
no denominations.
yeah,
We were like a part of a baited group for this church planting network called B3. Like a guy named J.R. Woodward, Dan White Jr.'s, like very like, this would be technical language, but like neo Anabaptist, like missional guys coming out of everything like missional, and great people. Love them.
yeah.
Still know them to this day. But no like larger governing structure. That was not something that I wanted at all. And I went into the church knowing, in order for me to be fully myself, I can't rely on funding from the church.
Mm.
I'm not going to not say what is real because the people in the front row might leave with all their money. I don't do that, you know? So me and my wife, it's a different journey when you do that financially and finding sources of income. And the majority of our income for 10 years came from outside the church, not from the church. We
Mm.
found ways to do that. My wife has her own private practice. She's a therapist eventually when she started along the way. So, you know, we closed that church down almost 3 years ago. Just like pandemic, post stuff, just
Yeah.
season of our life. I always sensed I would do it for 10 years. And like when we announced we were closing our church down, the church gave us a standing ovation. Like, how church stuff can go:
Oh, yeah.
hard, ugly,
Yes.
scandals, infighting, weird stuff. We didn't have any of that. I mean, of course, there's always conflict. 10 years, I have
Of
wounds of a
course.
pastor,
Oh,
betrayal,
yeah.
all that stuff. I've made mistakes, everything. But there was it was just like, we thought this was a rebuilding chapter, but it's not. And I think neither my wife nor I carried what I would consider an unnecessary burden of feeling like, if this church doesn't exist after us, it somehow devalues what it was.
Oh, yeah.
We never felt like, we're like, that was almost a decade and that was awesome. Very hard, difficult, heartbreaking, and the pastoral journey always is. Loving people is always heartbreaking,
Mm.
period. But that was amazing. And I think one of my saving graces with the church was, I was never so over identified with the role that I couldn't imagine a life after.
Mhm.
I'm like, no, imagine, that was the name of our church. I'm like, imagine as the primary vehicle through which the life of God is flowing through me to the world now. And that vehicle will change one day. And it did, So I like, that's why in the spaces you and I inhabit now, I've never had a bad experience in church.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, yes, and nothing's perfect, but like, I never had like church hurt. I never had spiritual trauma in the home. I was never on staff before I started a church either. I just never worked at a church. So like, I
Right.
was never connected enough to feel that. So for me, I'm like, even though I'm not in a congregation right now, still, I'm like, I had great experiences and I
Wow.
love the church I started. I'm very proud of what it was and who it was and how welcoming it was, et cetera. So a lot of the unraveling people do with church, a part of me initially is like, well, just move on. Like, who cares? I think people's reference point is always like church, doctrine, this. I'm like, no, it's life and God's out here, because I began out here. Then I came here. Now I'm back out here. But I also know it's not that simple, because I didn't
Mm.
grow up like that. I don't have those experiences. I don't have the family stuff. I don't have the youth group stuff. So I also know, like, I want to say that, but I'm like, that's not how it is.
No, you're so right. And I
Yeah.
love that you're so honest about that because, there are people who have been deeply wounded
Mhm,
in church. And unless you've had the experience, though, it's hard to even imagine. And that's,
mhm,
your experience being different is actually encouraging to me because
mhm,
I don't know many people who have left who don't have a heartbreaking story.
mm,
So it gives me hope,
mm,
that there are churches out there that are making a
mm,
positive impact. And I had great experiences in church as well.
mm,
But the things that were difficult were really difficult.
mm,
And so I had to go, but I don't have regrets. I don't look at that
mm,
time in my life and be like, "Ugh, I wasted my life." No, that
mm,
was exactly like you said. It was, a time in my life where this is where I needed to be. And I
mm.
had to learn and grow and get past that. So now, okay, so you've gotten past that. You've shut the doors of the church. What are you doing now?
Yeah, it took when I decided, my wife and I decided, like, really, like, we're going to announce we're closing the church. I instinctively, like, intuitively, something deep within my heart said, I need 18 months to just not do the next thing,
Yeah.
and I'm an introvert naturally. I'm at 5 on the Enneagram. People are familiar. So, like, I'm not just like a go, 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 next, come on, come on. Like, I'm not that type of person. It took a lot for me to embrace the role of a lead pastor because that's hard for me to do that, to be honest. I'm not a power and control person like I think a lot of lead pastors are, where, like, they
Yeah.
need that. Their ego naturally leads them to be in
Yeah.
control. I'm not like that. My ego leads me to not take responsibility. So it took a lot of courage for me to do that. And it took a lot out of me. I also look back, I'm proud. I'm like, I never burned out either. There was no burnout for 10 years or almost 10 years. And I let myself do it pretty freely. Even I think I wasn't good at the logistical part of pastoring. I was good at the human part. And even, like, I know what to do with my own wounds. That's what I know how to do in life. I began my journey, like I said, with a deep internal journey. This interior universe, I know how to work with. It's a Tuesday afternoon pastoring. You know what's best for me right now? Sitting at my window and carrying that conflict moment with me, like, oh, there's something I have to accept and let go of right now. Maybe I need to shed a tear over that. Yeah, that's the most pastoral thing. There's wounds right there, and if I let them grow, I'll develop a silent bitterness towards that person that will affect how I love them. I need to sit with that right now. The other stuff, trust me, I was horrible at, like, the meeting. I tell people I'd be 6 years into the church Googling what do I do in a meeting before I'm supposed to leave one.
Look like. Oh my
And
goodness.
so there was an unexpected road because there was something else I was starting that's essentially fell apart, which was really heartbreaking, of, like, last summer. And then through that loss, all of a sudden hospice started to emerge
Mm.
for me. And my wife was just like, hey, you should check this out. Like, no big deal, just check it out. And all of a sudden I started to look at this company. I heard this hospice company and a chaplaincy. And I was like, wow, this company is their culture, like, the language they're using is good, of how they treat people and interface and how they work with people where they are. There's no evangelical bait and switch at the end of life, like, no weird stuff like that, trying to get people saved on the deathbed.
Yeah.
And as I started to go deeper into the possibility of being a chaplain for hospice, so many unsettled parts of me just started to fall into place within me of, like, oh yeah, like, this is it. And I think a big part of it, to be honest, is chaplaincy in hospice for me right now at 40 is is all of my dreams and desires I have pastorally to care for people without any of the public attention my ego might seek from doing other work.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm in the next book and then the next writing and the next thing. Those things are still at work in us. We're all a mixture of darkness and light. Our decisions are
Right.
a mixture of 80%. This is a good thing. 20%. My ego's like, yeah, and this is also nice. Like, that's what our life is.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, this is helping save, not in a salvific sense, but this is saving me right now because I'm like, my only role is just to see people who aren't seen.
Mhm.
That's what I do. That's how
How
I
has
think
it
about
changed
chaplaincy.
you? Because that sounds really powerful. How has it changed you?
I think there's a mutual seeing that's happening when I'm with patients. I think God seeing them through me and God seeing me through them. That's how I think about it. And I think where I'm at, it's ironic we're having this conversation right now and I have a new book coming out because when I started this year, I just had this sense of like, I'm tired of talking about religion right now. And I've done it forever. And I told that to a friend over Christmas. They're like, "Isn't that all you've ever done?" I'm like, "Yeah, good point."
Yeah.
And I loved it, and I love that. It's not a bad thing. I just, for me personally, I'm like, I don't want to keep talking about all this right now. It doesn't, which says nothing about me embodying the life of God, the way of Jesus. I'm just tired of talking about things right now. And in hospice, it's not about belief. It's not about abstract. What do abstract religious beliefs have to do with a nonverbal patient who's 98 and not speaking when all I do is sit with them in silence? What does words have to me? I'm like, it's just pure connection, which I love. And also I need that right now. I need to love. I think I had a fantasy when the church was ending to be like, I'm just gonna write, I'm gonna do a couple public things, and that's it, and just be with Hawaii. Because I was scared to get back involved in the messiness of real relationships. That's why I was scared to pastor in the beginning. I'm scared to fail publicly. I'm scared to disappoint people close to me if I really try and lead. And that was a lot of courage I had to enact to pastor. And after church, it was like that little part of me creeps back in. Your ego only has so many moves because it's a structure. Your personality, like it's gonna do the same things over and over to protect yourself, to keep you safe. That's why you have self-awareness is huge. Like, oh yeah, that's just my ego trying to protect myself from this. No, you're fine. But it's the same things. Like the same ego with less power will reemerge with a different mask on 10 years later. Less powerful, different mask, same moves. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, I was just scared again to get involved in relationships. And I was trying to hide through writing. It doesn't mean the writing and all that's bad, but it's like, I thought I could avoid that. No, no, no. Just like pastoring, once I surrendered to that, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, this is where I feel whole. This is what I want to do. And so I think it's changed me because in those moments, I'm like, no one sees this. No one cares. There's no platform involved. There's no Christian publishing industry. There's no what's your next move. I'm like, this is just pure seeing and connection. And this is what I need right now. And this is what I want to continue to give my life to. So the peak God is, there's a mutual seeing happening in those moments that I'm super grateful for right now.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. You're making me want
Yeah.
to go be a hospice volunteer. I mean, I've often thought of it. I think, but the last time I thought about it was when I was in evangelicalism and I wanted to save the people. I had an agenda.
Right, right, right.
But to not have an agenda and just sit with
Is
someone in their really, I could be described as a lowest point, but sometimes it's their highest point. It's like,
mm,
it's just like to be able to experience the miracle of a soul about to leave this world and
mm,
and I don't know. That's
yeah,
really, really cool. I love how you
yeah.
describe that, Kevin.
And I think with after, like for you, like being a coach and being involved in people's lives, like, I mean, I've been talking about, like what people call deconstruction, like that journey just was kickstarted for me a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I've been through so many evolutionary stages of faith, so many different changes and so many things. But what pastoring, like the incarnational messiness of me being involved in relationships saves me. Cause if not, I'm just in my head and I'm arguing or thinking about things all the time. And it makes me cynical. I've realized that I'm like, the less connected I am with people, the more cynical I am. I've recognized that in my own body. So
Mm,
when I feel the volume turned up a little bit on my cynicism, I'm like, you feel disconnected right now.
yeah.
You don't feel as part of things like you want to. The answer is not to be smarter, it's to be more connected. And
Yes.
I I care about people. That's why when I talk to people who are in probably closer to where I was before, where you're talking, you're raging against the machine. And I get that. That's a part of it. That's a part of it. It's a part
Yeah.
of the journey. But I'm just like, but after this is over, like life just goes on. How healthy are your relationships? How fearlessly, or at least how courageously are you giving yourself to the world? This is where our life is. This is the life of Christ. that matters. The other stuff is ideas and it's concepts and it's important. Take it apart. But once this is taken apart, it will continue to happen.
Mhm.
The life is every day, how connected, how present, how humble, how much do we slow down, how grateful are we? This is what matters. And that's what I care about. So I need to stay grounded in that or I just get cynical. I just
Mm.
on Instagram and see religious things and people talking. I'm like, shut the that's
Yeah.
sadly, my default response is that. It's just like,
Yeah. Oh, here
I
we go
can't do it.
again.
Yes.
Well,
And I'm
and
like,
I understand that. I do think the anger phase of all of this, because there's a grief process, and that's
yeah,
part of the grief
absolutely.
process when you leave your religion or deconstruct. It's very, it took me by surprise, the anger
Mm,
phase. And I didn't
mm.
like it, but I had to go through it.
Absolutely.
And because I've been through it, I know that's not where I want to stay. I don't want to linger
Mm.
there.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
because I'm trying to honestly, the whole point of my deconstruction was to lean into love.
Mm.
And if I'm going to lean into love, it's really hard to do when I'm just pissed off at the people I'm supposed to be loving. You know what I mean? It's like,
Exactly.
relax.
Exactly.
Everybody I'm realizing is doing the best that they can with what they know.
Absolutely.
With
Totally.
what they know in the phase that they're in the area, and some people will grow past it and some people won't. And just the people who are supposed to grow with you, they're going to. And you can trust that. And
Mm.
it just takes all the pressure off, you know?
That was always a rhetorical, just kind of question I held before me on my pastoral journey, and probably even a little bit before that. But I would ask this question, like looking at other people, even to myself, I say, why is it so hard to just let other people be?
Mm,
You can let them be. You don't have to disagree with them. If conversations come up, you can be honest. You can talk,
mhm,
you can critique whatever you want. But at the same time, if my anger and frustration with other people lingers, like you say, once again, I am allowing other people to have the power over whether or not I'm able to feel free, I'm able to feel joy, and that's not freedom. To me, that's the real heart of the pastoral and the caring journey and loving journey is how can I be totally committed to people but utterly free from?
mm,
That comes back from a Walter Brueggemann quote where he said something like that. But that journey of how do I commit to people but be liberated from them? I say, whenever you're liberating other people to just let them be, you're not liberating them. You're actually experiencing the liberation for
mm,
yourself because they had power over you and you didn't know it. And that's why it's like, as pastorally, that's why I wasn't the shaming type of like, hey, this is all an invitation. If the pastor and the coach and the care and the healer has the very humble role of saying, I will go with you as far as you let me.
mhm.
And I am divesting myself of all power and control
Yeah, you're
because
leading. I'm following. I'm
exactly.
just here to be a companion on
And
your journey.
if you want to go 5 feet deep, that's great. I'll be with you there. If you want to go 8 feet deep, we can do that too. But if I start to lead you to 6 and you push back, let's stay there. If any frustration I have in that moment is not about the other person, it's about me. Because I might feel like I'm not doing it. It's like pastors. A lot of times pastors are correcting people just because they feel like if they make a mistake, that somehow reflects poorly on me and then affects my values. Now I have to shame you into doing what I think is appropriate because it makes me feel better about what I'm doing. No, they're a person. They're not your kids.
Well, I
And
think we
even your
take it
kids.
personal.
Yeah,
We take
exactly.
it very personally when somebody believes something different because our beliefs are our foundation. It's what we are clinging to for
Mm,
purpose and meaning. And
mm,
we think it gives us the answers and the certainty that we crave so deeply. And so when somebody believes something different, it feels like an offense.
absolutely.
And it's
Mm,
not. They just
exactly.
believe they were raised somewhere different, in a different country, in a different state. I mean, heck, moving to Utah showed me that. I came
Mm,
from the Bible Belt to Utah. So I went from the Bible Belt to the Mormon Belt. And I mean, it's the same damn thing. It's just a different
mm,
religion. It's just saturated,
mm,
saturated. And that's because this is where they grew up.
mm,
And when you
mm.
start to realize that, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
We're really just kind of trying to belong
Mm,
in the
mm,
communities where we were born, you
mhm,
know,
mm, mhm,
and for some reason it's very offensive when somebody believes and was raised with a different mindset.
mm.
We should do studies on that.
I remember when I was like 23, 24, I went on my first ever like missions trip, like
Mm.
pretty classic, like young and cool, but it's like old colonial ways of missions through young
Oh,
and
yeah.
cool people, basically.
Yeah.
And, we were in Bali in Indonesia at the time. It was like a surfing thing,
Mm.
you know? And so we're in Bali surfing and, doing whatever type of missions however they shape that. And I remember sitting in this alley. It's kind of like the Waikiki, like the busy part of Bali. It's called Kuta. Crazy. All the tourists are there. And there's like a little alley you walk down to get to the beach. There's stores and everything there. And there was this family my wife and I had gotten to know who are from Bali, from the island, like a grandma, a mom, her kids. And I was sitting there with the grandma. You're talking about like a lady in her 80s, like the wrinkles that tell 1,000 stories, like pretty black teeth, like doesn't speak a lick of English. I'm not speaking Balinese for sure. And I'm sitting there at night one time and I just stop and me and her are just sitting next to each other in silence. Right. And there's a lot of busyness on the streets, right? It's a pretty active place. But I remember like I'm there on a missions trip, so I probably should be evangelizing right now or something, whatever. But I remember sitting in silence, just having this conversation with myself and with God, like, what would I say? Like, this woman's lived here for 80 years and has seen it change so much. Her culture, her ways of doing things, her ways of seeing, her love, her care for her family, all the things she's been through. I'm kind of like, what am I supposed to do? Change what tell her about Jesus? Well, you only speak the same language. Like, I just was having these like existential, like with God, like, what is this? I'm
Mhm.
supposed to say something right now. And in the midst of that conversation, neither one of us shared a word. She just like cuts up a fruit and hands it to me in silence. That's it. That was the exchange. I said, oh, she had a gift for me. Like I came across the other side of the world to change people. And here's this person just says, here's a gift for you. I'm not trying to change you, but here's a gift. Like that type of story and other people at least went, oh yeah, like we're somehow we're all in this together. And I was just never like, I can't just try to change what people believe. I want life. I want more joy for everybody.
Right,
I'm
right.
like, that differences of belief as a pastor probably wasn't the best as an evangelist, but I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Sorry, what are we doing here? I was supposed to change how you think right now.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I know a young woman who went, to Asia, like I think Cambodia. And
Mm,
when she was there, she was working for like a Bible translating company or mission. And it changed her because she said, these people were so happy and they prayed to their ancestors and they, worshiped what they
mm,
worship, which was different. Some of them were Buddhist, which isn't really a religion, but more of a, philosophy or something.
mhm,
And she's like, and they were so happy and they were so lovely. And I thought to myself, why am I trying to make them into Americans? Like,
mhm,
this is their culture. This is their life. Like, I
mhm,
don't understand why God would be angry at them for not believing like me.
mhm,
And that's when her question started, was on the mission
mhm,
trip. Isn't that
mhm.
interesting?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is the value of missions is to allow other people to evangelize us.
Yes. Yeah, the culture shock for me, when I went to Bolivia, I went to Bolivia with Compassion International, and I remember coming home and just like looking around at everything we had, and it made me sick because
Mhm,
like the kids didn't even really have toys. They were playing jacks in the dirt, living in these mud huts, but they were so happy. Meanwhile, we have big screen TVs and all these electronics, and our kids were miserable. And I'm like, like,
mhm,
what in the world did I just witness? I think the culture
mhm,
shock was coming back to the plenty and realizing how happy those people were
mhm,
in just the little bit that they had, you
mhm,
know? Really
mhm.
eye-opening.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's the value of evangelism is getting evangelized by others, to be honest.
Absolutely. If you're open to it.
Mm,
Because a lot of times we're taught not to even allow that, not to let that in. But I
mm,
think it's important that we do. We learn from other humans, whether they believe like us or not. And
mm,
actually, we learn more from the ones who don't believe like us, I
mm.
think.
Yeah,
But rather than the echo chamber, that we
Mm,
all get so comfortable
mm, mm,
in.
yeah.
So let's talk about your book then. You've got a book coming out. Tell me a little bit about it. It sounds super interesting, and I love the title. Tell us the title.
Yeah, the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus. It's mystics, the Black prophetic tradition, and why I'm still a Christian.
Hmm.
Well, one, it just came from, I took a walk across the street from my house around the time our church was closing. And I was just taking a walk, which I do pretty regularly. And I just had this thought. I'm like, I want to write a book about Jesus. Because I'm like, after this awakening moment at 18, after a bunch of formal studies and reading nonstop for 10 years and then pastoring for about 10 years in a very different way, than a lot of my peers, I'm like, what do I really think? And I would think for so many people who are deconstructing now and going through these changes, I said, why is it? I'm like, they've gone through changes I went through a long time ago, and I've gone through many more changes that will rock their lives even more, how they think and how they see. I'm like, why is it still so natural for me to say I'm a Christian? When there seem to a lot of people that have a hard time with that, and I have no judgment on that. I could kind of care less whether or not they label themselves that.
Yeah.
Um, And I just said, yeah, what is that? Why is it for me? And some of it, so the book really came from that. So I'm like, there's this cosmic Christ who holds all things together, animates all things, is the engine of the universe, the creative drive of an expanding universe, the organizing principle of complexity universe. That is also a good, loving, benevolent force, right? In Colossians 1:17, when Paul says, in him all things hold together. I'm like, that force, that energy, that cosmic glue, that heartbeat at the center of the universe, like this is the Christ that emerges in 10,000 ways every single day. So I'm like, that always stayed with me, a direct connection and feeling safe within that. But there's also this liberating Jesus that I've inherited from the Black prophetic tradition that continues to call me to the margins, that
Hmm.
continues to call me to be involved in the world, be involved in justice. And a part of the book why I discovered that was me making sense of why I'm still a Christian, right? After my awakening, why is it so comfortable for me to say I'm committed to the way of Jesus? Because I'm like, I've read all the books that make someone question their beliefs about Jesus and their participation in the Christian tradition, even more so. I wrestled with the radical contingency of beliefs having a starting point that leaves you sometimes unable to hold on to anything,
Yeah.
especially with certainty. They'll let go of the need for certainty, period.
Hmm.
Um, and I thought one of the main things was for my initial awakening experience, like I described earlier, from the very beginning, my faith was not based on beliefs. It was based on embodiment and experience. So beliefs about God, beliefs about Jesus, beliefs about the Bible, how you see those things, those changed for me over and over and over and over again. And my way of seeing God changed over and over and over again. But my place in the experiential center of Christ has remained unmoved.
Hmm.
When you talk about deconstructing religion for the sake of leaning into love, I'm like, that life in love has not changed.
Hmm.
That has remained. And uh, you started to talk about this. I'm like, for most people, beliefs are like a house for their ego, right? Ken Wilber talks about your beliefs are like a house for your ego. So when people start to deconstruct their beliefs, it feels like you're dismantling their home. And their ego has what Wilber calls a death seizure because it feels like you're taking away my very well. When you take away my beliefs, you're taking away the very thing that makes me feel safe and makes me who I am. But for me, I'm like, I want to tell people this isn't the case.
Hmm.
Because faith, like for the mystic, the primary center of faith is not beliefs you hold about God, it's the experiential knowing you're being held by God.
Ooh.
That is
Ooh.
not the same thing. Beliefs put us in control. Being held means you're not in control, but you're still safe. That's
And
the
you
real
trust
journey to
it.
the second.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so I think for a lot of people, or for me, changing my beliefs didn't feel like taking apart my home. It registered more the last 15, 20 years as updating the map while I'm traveling on the terrain of Christ. right? Updating the map as you explore and discover more of the terrain of Christ is natural and necessary. You can update the map because the map isn't the point, the terrain is.
Mm.
Me giving you a map of Hawaii is not the same as you being in the ocean that's 2 blocks in here.
Right.
The ocean is what we're after. The ocean is God. The ocean is freedom. The ocean is joy, etc. That's what I'm interested in. So I think there's ways for us to continue to update our map and still be totally grounded and centered. And for me, each chapter is like, there's a chapter called experience and embodiment, or our body and the body of Christ. And each one, half of it is like, here's what the cosmic Christ says about compassion. And then here's how the liberating concrete Jesus calls us to be people of compassion on the margins. I have a chapter called Love and Liberation. There is a universal love from the cosmic Christ that is equally accessible to all human beings at all times, no matter what your religious creeds are or whatever. And then there is a concrete Jesus who calls us to work for liberation. So and what I discovered in this writing process, and even before I started writing, was, every chapter you read, every single movement of compassion to the edges, however I frame it, I'm like, you can do this no matter what your religious beliefs are.
Yeah.
You can experience love no matter what you believe right now. You can work for liberation no matter what you believe. So a person says, I don't know if I believe this about the Bible. I don't know if I believe this about God. Part of me is like, what does that have to do with you experiencing love right now? And what does that have to do with you having the courage and the care to work for liberation? Doesn't.
Mhm.
So to me, I'm like, you can be fully committed to as weird as it sounds, you can be fully committed to the way of Jesus, regardless of your religious belief. And so for a world where people are taking apart their beliefs, I'm like, life in the living reality. Like there's this writer, Adyashanti. He writes from a more Buddhist background, but he has a book called I forget what it's called. He has a book about Jesus though. And he uses this phrase that I love, and he talks about the energetic signature of Christ.
Mm.
The energetic signature, the presence, the actual felt, known, experiential knowing of God. Living in that reality is before your beliefs, beyond your beliefs, and can never be contained within your belief. And so for me, after that, there is a cosmic Christ who holds all things together that makes us feel safe. And there's a liberating Jesus I inherited from the Black prophetic tradition that calls us to be dangerous. And this journey, this book is about what it means to be connected and be committed to both of those. And it's not an idea. I look back and I'm like, this is what my life is.
Mhm.
This is why this makes sense to me. That's why I can change every belief. Don't care, not that concerned about the creeds, to be honest, or people's doctrinal beliefs. And I'm like, I'm just as committed to the way of Jesus and to the experiential knowing of God as I was when I first had that experience at 18.
Mm.
So
I love
there's a way
that.
forward. It's a way forward after everything else. I'm like, this is, and one example of how to hold together the path forward when you don't know what you believe anymore, or you don't care about what you believe anymore.
Right, right. Wow. That
Hmm.
sounds so good. And
Hmm.
I think this podcast is coming out after the book
Hmm.
comes out. So I'm excited because if what you heard just, I don't know, made you go, I need to know more, you can pick up his book. And are you going to where is it going to be available? Everywhere?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, probably best places to get it. So the Concrete Christ, the Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus, Kevin Sweeney, my other books are on there too. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's something. When I wrote, I'm like, it took me a long time because the season of my life when I wrote my other 2 books pretty quickly, it took a lot more work than the other ones. But when I'm done, I'm like, this is what I really think. This isn't just an idea. I'm like, this is how I really see things. And this is how I continue to evolve on this journey. It's like, oh, I don't believe that. I'm like, who cares? What do I
Yeah.
do with where I'm at? That doesn't matter. The path, but I want to tell people it keeps going. Everything keeps going. And I want that version of things continuing for you, for me, for everybody who we care about and everybody who we're not connected with to be good. That's what I care about for people.
Mm.
I think this all really matters, and I think this is all still really good. And I want people to continue to trust that.
That is beautiful, Kevin. Thank you so
Mm,
much.
mm,
Thank you for
mm.
being so honest and open and sharing your journey. It's to me, I'm still like in awe that you just never really had religious beliefs, and you had this experience by doing something, you know, doing a mushroom. Like, how crazy. Like, to me, I'm like, man, I had to go through church and I had to
Yes. Well,
so
see,
many
that's why when I
like,
first went to Bible college and I was around Pentecostals who were speaking in tongues and talking about healing people, and I
oh yeah.
wasn't sure what I believed about that, but I was always open because I'm like, if I had this experience while I was tripping on mushrooms, like, I don't need this to not be weird. It's already
Right.
weird to me,
It's
so I
already
can
weird.
heal.
Yeah. That's so funny. But yeah, what a great I love it. I love your perspective and I honor your journey, Kevin. Thank you
Thank you.
for sharing it with us today. And I'm going to put all the links for people to
Mm,
find you and your book in the show notes. And thank you. I
yeah.
appreciate you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie. And I don't take these times for granted, having these conversations. So I appreciate this time a lot.